Welcome to the Opportunity Podcast, where entrepreneurs come to learn from real buyers, sellers, and industry experts on the lesser-known growth opportunities to build their online business empires. We'll uncover tactics veteran online business entrepreneurs have used to build, buy, flip, and sell their way towards personal wealth. Sit back, grab a coffee, and get ready to uncover hidden growth secrets. The Opportunity Podcast starts now.
Welcome back to the Opportunity Podcast, your go-to resource for hitting growth opportunities throughout online business. We're your hosts. I'm Brandon.
And I'm Sarah, and thanks for joining us for our latest episode.
Today, we will be speaking with Kyle Roof, the lead SEO for High Voltage SEO, an inventor and co-creator of PageOptimizer Pro, and a co-founder of Internet Marketing Gold, or IMG for short, which were all started with the goal of running tests on Google's algorithm and led Kyle to obtaining a US patent for determining whether something is or is not a ranking factor in the eyes of Google. Kyle explains the common misconceptions that many business owners have about how the Google algorithm works and gives us his insight to how it actually works based on his own experience in testing the platform over the years. He gives newcomers to the SEO space an actionable checklist to better understand how you should approach your on-page SEO and how to avoid being hit by a Google update penalty. Also in this episode, he goes over how to bounce back from an update that may have affected your site, no matter how big or small your business may be.
That's right, Brandon, but we won't give away too much just yet, so let's dig into the interview and see what Kyle has to share. And then at the end of the episode, we'll go over some common questions online business owners face and what you can learn from them. Let's get started. Hey everyone, welcome back to the Opportunity Podcast. We are really excited to have today's guest on, Kyle Roof. Probably someone you already know if you're in the SEO space, but great opportunity to have him on today. So thanks for coming on, Kyle. How you doing?
Thanks so much for having me. I'm doing quite well. Thank you.
Awesome. And where are you calling in from in the world right now?
Right now I'm in Chiang Mai, Thailand. I highly recommend it.
Amazing. I really miss the weather there.
I know that there are some people in Empire Flippers that think that Vietnam is where you need to be, but they're sadly mistaken. It's Thailand.
Oh, yeah. Ooh, getting this started with fighting words. Yeah. There we go. I like it. No, I love both. It's been ages since I've been in Chiang Mai, and I think now in this pandemic world, I have been eyeing Asia just wistfully, waiting for borders to open back up. I can't wait to make a run for it and be back in Thailand. So you're so lucky you have it to yourself now. Definitely hold on to that while you can.
For sure.
Awesome. Well, for many people who are well familiar with you, they hardly need an introduction, but we'll go ahead and do one anyway. So for those who don't know you, tell us a little bit about yourself, your entrepreneurial journey, and what that looks like today.
Sure. So I'm the lead SEO for High Voltage SEO, which is our agency. We have offices in Phoenix, Berlin, and Melbourne. We do local to national to international SEO to everything in between. I'm the inventor and co-creator of PageOptimizer Pro, which is an on-page SEO tool. I'm one of the co-founders of Internet Marketing Gold. IMG is what we call it, and it's a place to learn about SEO where we have courses, and we also run tests on Google's algorithm. That's probably what I'm most famous for, is running tests on Google's algorithm. I've conducted more than 400 tests. I actually have a US patent on determining if something is or is not a ranking factor in Google or other search engines. And I'm also famous, I guess, for showing people how SEO actually really works. I famously, during a competition, ranked a site number 1 in Google Organic and Maps, and that site was written in lorem ipsum in fake dummy text to show how the algorithm actually works. So much so that Google actually wrote a new rule for that and then penalized my site for that brand new rule, which is pretty interesting.
You made it when Google made a rule just to punish you. I think that's,
It wasn't fun in the moment, but in retrospect, it was actually great because it validated everything I was talking about and then gives me a fun talking point.
Absolutely. No, that's awesome. Well, hearing all that, clearly you definitely have to have a commitment and a love of this, I would assume, if you're going to go get banned by Google, do 400 tests, go through the patent process. I'm wondering, what is it that drives you to do that within SEO? What really resonates with you? And what do you find most exciting about being in this industry?
The best thing is certainly the problem solving. I think one of my special skills is connecting the dots, getting from here to there, what's causing this and how we can kind of put things together. And I do a lot of client-side SEO. And when you step into a new site, it's a completely new situation. There are new problems to solve, and that site has a history and things were done to it, and they've got goals and kind of how can we get where the site is now to where the site needs to be. And that type of problem solving is a blast. I also really like math. I was never, I think, great at school math, calculus and trigonometry and stuff like that, but I'm really good at statistics and probability, and those are pretty useful skills in SEO. And so I do enjoy kind of the practical aspect of that type of math and kind of putting into play with different sites.
Yeah, it's amazing that you've had all this experience now over the years. And I'm sure you've noticed a few maybe trends or maybe updates to Google that have changed over the years. I'm sure back in the day when a lot of people were doing keyword stuffing and that was the way the future would go for ranking in Google. And obviously that changed quite drastically to the complete opposite. So I'm curious, what do you think others in the SEO space, or maybe even like newcomers to the online business and content space, think Google works or compared to how it actually works?
I think the biggest thing that people think about how Google works is they think Google makes value judgments. They think, well, if I have the best product or the best service or the best written content on this webpage, Google will see that and it'll make a value judgment and say that, oh, this is clearly the best, and so I'm going to rank it that way. And I think actually people that are outside the industry think that that's how Google works as well, because when they see the results and they see the number one result or the number two result, they think Google's actually making a judgment that this is the best product or the best service. And that simply isn't the case. Google isn't making any value judgments at all, because Google is an algorithm. And how it really works is you have to give that algorithm the math that it wants. And that's one of those things that's difficult for people to wrap their minds around, because they think, well, I'm the best, and I've written this really great piece of content. But if you haven't given the algorithm what it needs so that it can understand what this page is about, it can understand what your product is about, and that it can understand that this is the page that it should be ranking, it doesn't matter how good your product is or your service is, you're simply not going to rank. And so kind of getting to that point and understanding that it's not a value judgment, but it's actually just the math from the content that you have on the page is the key, is critical in kind of making that step forward in SEO.
Okay. Yeah, that makes total sense, because it is an algorithm itself. It's not necessarily a human being that's going through and tying those emotions through the content to what they think should be ranking. So that's a really important note that you mentioned there. And if I was a beginner looking to get into SEO, what would you say would be maybe the first steps, or what would you say you should start with as far as getting the right SEO kind of game plan or strategy from the beginning?
The big players in the space like Moz and Ahrefs and SEMrush, they all have pretty good beginner guides. And I think if you kind of if you're at like absolute beginner, you probably need to read one of those. I also have a beginner's guide, and I don't think it's too shabby to kind of help you understand a framework for SEO. But really the first thing you have to do is you really need to have a site that you can play with. Just get a site up and then put things into action that you've read about or that you've heard people talk about. It's a whole different ballgame going to understanding SEO to doing SEO. You can understand a lot of concepts or understand what this is or that is, but it is a whole other thing when you actually have to do these steps to complete something, to put a web page up, to optimize it, or then kind of taking things a step farther if you want to then try a technique or a concept. Having a page or a website that you've actually done it to is a whole other thing than just reading about it or knowing what it is. And so if you're at that beginner level, you definitely need to have a site, and a site that you can let go. You don't want it to be the first site that you're trying to make $1 off of. If it's a site that you truly care about, that's not what I'm talking about. But a site that maybe you're interested in the topic so that you won't hate yourself for writing about it, but that you have a site that you can actually then try everything out on. And really, that's the best way to learn.
That's interesting. When you're talking about having a site that basically you're not trying to hold on to it forever, you're trying to have that beginner site and learn. And I'm curious, it just sort of came to mind as you're speaking about it. At what point do you know you're ready to start expanding onto other sites and go, okay, this trial site, let's call it that, doesn't have to be my bread and butter anymore? Is there like a clear definitive point where it's like, okay, I'm ready to move on? Or is it just more nuanced than that?
It comes down to having a framework for understanding what you're going to do and why you're going to do it. And when you think about putting up a page for a particular keyword, you want to have a success rate. It needs to be better than 50-50, where, if it's just 50-50, then it's just a coin flip and it really doesn't matter what you're doing, because, if half the time you're right and half the time you're wrong, then you might as well not really do SEO, but just pull out a coin to help you make decisions. You need to be at a success rate that's a little bit higher than that, probably in that 60 to 70% rate, because then at that point, you know that it's not really a guess, that you're putting yourself in the best chance for success. And once you're doing that, then you can be successful. You can be successful at a clip that's going to be worth your while. That it's not just going to be, I don't know if it's going to work, let's just try it. Versus, hey, I know that if I do this, I'm going to win more. It's more likely than not that I'll be successful, or that I'm going to win this particular keyword. I'm going to do something that's going to be positive. And so once you probably get into that 60 to 70% range, that's when you can hold your own and what you do will be worth your time. I think once you can get above that, probably into that 70 to maybe a little bit percent plus, that's when you're more of an SEO expert at that point, because it's not just more likely than not that it's probable that what you do is going to be successful. And that's probably the difference between, the 50-50 and less, that's absolute beginner. A little bit above that is somebody that can probably do it successfully. And then above that's where you hit kind of expert level or advanced SEO. And so probably you want to measure your outcomes is a way to figure that one out, on when you can go from that kind of tester site or kind of dabbling as a hobby into something that maybe somebody's going to pay you for, or you can run your own sites and do it as your main form of income.
I really like that. I don't think we've really had anyone come on and sort of set that threshold, because I'm sure there's so many people running sites day to day, not really thinking about, is the majority of stuff that I'm doing here successful? Is this working? I think they might see one part working and go, okay, this is good enough to expand outward and try to get new sites under my belt, without really seeing the whole picture or really taking into account and doing those tests, like you're saying, to say, okay, this is good enough. I'm fairly comfortable with moving on. I guess it ties into my next question, because, I'm wondering, what are the mistakes that beginners make that set them back the most? Is there something that just seems to really get most beginners down that you notice?
I see a couple of things. One that I see is that they see some sort of specialized technique or an advanced technique, and they jump right into that really without doing the foundational aspects of things. And then what I found in those situations where they're doing that, they also don't complete the technique. They do 20% of this, and then they kind of give it up, and then they do about 30% of that one, and then they hear about something shiny over there, and they decide to do about 10% of that. And then they get frustrated, I've tried everything. I've done it all, but really missed the foundational stuff. They're in more advanced techniques, and they don't really complete those techniques, and they end up kind of spinning their tails a bit. I see that quite regularly. The other thing I see are trying to benchmark keywords. That's really not where it's at in SEO. You see kind of beginning SEO very concerned about where am I for this one money keyword? When really you want to look at things at the page level. How is this page performing? Is it gaining keywords that it's ranking for? Is it gaining impressions? Is it gaining clicks? Is it getting conversions? Those are the things that you want to measure as your KPIs. Individual keywords really don't matter in the long run. But if you're having a page that is healthy and growing and converting, those are the things that are most important. And so kind of being myopic and looking at just a particular, a single keyword, is a big mistake that beginning SEOs make, rather than looking at overall page performance.
Excellent. Yeah, I totally get what you're saying there, especially on that front of people trying, they get in the deep water and all of a sudden they don't even finish the thing that they were meant to be doing. And, it's that can be catastrophic if you're not doing that right. Well, for my next question, this is a big question. It's a little bit broad, but I'm sure that you've kind of got we'll go from the best practices approach. So what would you say would be basic and best practices for ranking your site quickly?
Well, when you look at a page and you start kind of testing, what's Google doing here? And what you find out is that they're looking at specific places on a page, and they're looking for the terms that are inside that page. And so one of those terms would obviously be your target keyword, the keyword that you're trying to rank for. So if there's a term that you like, your ideal client is sitting at the computer and they type in the keyword into Google, that term that you want to win, your money term, your target term. Google's looking for that on your page, and it's looking for very specific places for that term. It's looking for variations of that term. It's looking for contextual terms that provide context and meaning. But not even worrying about variations, and not even worrying about contextual terms, but just your target keyword itself. The most important places that you can put a keyword are in your URL, in your title tag, which is often referred to as a meta title, in your H1, which is the title that humans see, and then within paragraph tags, so the content, the text that lives on the page. If you were to put your target keyword one time in those 4 places, you've actually probably done 60% of SEO right there. That's the dirty little secret of SEO, is that the thing that is most foundational also does the most heavy lifting. And if you realize that you haven't done that, if you could just do that, you're actually going to put yourself in a much better position. One quick caveat, if somebody's listening and they're very new to SEO, is if you have an established page that's ranking pretty well, don't change your URL. If you realize, I don't have my target term in there, but it is doing pretty well, don't change the URL, because if you change the URL, that's a new page to Google. But if it's a brand new page, or it's a page that was just recently launched, or a page that isn't ranking at all, then go ahead and get your keyword in that URL. But otherwise, leave that as is, but then make sure you've got in your title tag. That's the title that search engines see, your H1, the title that humans see, and then within the body content. So just do it one time in each of those places, and you've done a lot of SEO right there.
Yeah, it makes total sense. And it kind of leads into my next question as well when it comes to when Google is scraping your site, it's going through all of your metadata and your tags, and it's trying to locate what it is that you're trying to rank for or what it is your page is about. A lot of SEOs, I'm sure, have experienced this where they've been affected by a recent Google algorithm update. I know the Penguin update, affected a lot of people. What was that, a year ago or something like that now? And I'm curious, what can these content site owners do to protect their sites from future algorithm updates and how to maybe even bounce back from a recent update that Google has just released?
It's funny you mentioned the web spam. Google actually, I think, just rolled out a web spam update 2 or 3 days ago.
Oh, wow.
Actually, as we talk as well, about 10 days ago, Google just released a how to read graphs in your search console. And I think it's like how Google interprets drops. If you just did a search for that, it's in their developer's guide. By the way, a lot of people don't read the developer's guide. And if you really want to get into SEO, that's probably something you should at least check out. Get a lot of insights. But when you're hit by an update and you think you've been hit, the thing you want to identify first is the pages on your site that were actually impacted. A lot of people just look at their site as a whole and they're like, oh, my site got hit. And then they end up really spinning in circles about what to do about fixing it, because then they get advice from, well, this person said do this, and that person said do that, and this person said do this. But if you don't identify the actual page that's been hit, you really aren't going to know what's going on. So what you want to do is, within Search Console, sort by pages, and then you want to do a comparison in time from before you were hit to after you were hit. And then what you're going to see are the pages that were impacted the most, and sort by impressions, and in particular impressions lost. And that's going to show you your biggest losers. From there, you might find like, oh, you know what? Pages on our site that aren't converting and have nothing to do with how we make money were impacted. And they might be pages that you weren't even trying to do anything with SEO or gain any traffic from. And then you realize like, okay, well, we were touched by this, but it doesn't matter. And so that way you're not wasting any time on trying to fix a problem that isn't a problem. The next thing you might realize is, okay, well, they affected pages that we care about. But then when you look at the keywords that were most impacted, so you've identified that page, this page has been hit the most. And then you can do the exact same thing, sort by the keywords that lost the most. You might be like, realize that, oh, you know what? This is a page that we care about, but these are keywords we don't care about. Google was giving us these keywords before, and that's what Google does. Pages will rank for hundreds, if not thousands of keywords once they're really healthy. You might lose 200 keywords off of a page, but they didn't matter. So again, you've identified that this wasn't a problem. But then if you identify like, yes, this is a problem. We've lost these keywords, or these keywords were impacted heavily. At that point, you need to decide, does that keyword actually belong on this page? Is it something that should be here? And if it is, then you probably just need to add sections for it. Add new H2s. Those are subheadings on your page. Add new sections. Get that term specifically on your page and up your counts. Or you might realize, you know what, this is a term that we like and we need it, but it's not really suited to this page. Google was attaching it to that page, but now you realize, you know what, it doesn't really work for this page. That just means you need new content. You need to create a new page for it. And that's going to kind of outline your content schedule from there. And usually if you do those things, you can do pretty decent on recovering. One other thing that I would add would be, and this has happened in more recent updates, is that I think Google really cares if it can tell if you're a real company. That seems to be a real big push. You might have heard about the Medic update, or you might have heard about EAT factors. Those, more than anything, go to can a bot determine if you're real? And so what you probably want to do, in addition to what I discussed on finding the pages that were affected, you probably also make sure that a bot can figure out that you're a real company. Do you display a real address? Do you have a local phone number? Do you have not just a contact form, but are you actually giving real emails? Do you have different departments? Do you have a privacy policy? Do you have a returns policy? Those types of terms of service pages. And then do you have like a page that's about your team, showing the people of the company? And then you have like an About Us page showing about the company. And do you have organization schema on your site? So those things that a bot could crawl into a site and see that you're a real company. Keep in mind, again, Google's not human. It can't look at your website and be like, oh, these guys are real. This is a real thing. And also, Google's not human. They can't walk to your company and see like, oh, okay, this is legit. It can only look at your website, and it can only find things that a bot can find. So you want to make sure that you are presenting yourself as a real company and giving the things that would indicate to a bot that you're legitimate. And I think in addition to finding the pages and the keywords that were hit and kind of making those judgments there, I think you also want to make sure that you're presenting yourself as a real company to Google.
Yeah, that's a really great insight to that, because I guess we do get lost in the on-page SEO when we're trying to improve things and trying to rank certain keywords, and we forget about the higher picture or the bigger picture, I guess, and making sure that your business is looking like a legitimate business and you're not just throwing out a bunch of content without that experience behind you or backing you up, which I guess ultimately having those other links and other factors on your page kind of give you that also that trust, I guess, in a sense. Now, diving deeper into maybe more advanced or experienced SEO techniques, I'm part of a few SEO forums and groups, and I noticed recently a lot of people talking about sponsored links, how they're competing with no follow links, and a lot of other factors. But I'm curious, what would you say is your advanced strategies, and what would you recommend as far as really moving the needle in terms of SEO for those looking to move up in the rankings?
Something that I've gotten into recently is determining the authority or the strength, or however you like to use those terms, the strength of your own site without using a third-party tool. So without using domain authority or domain rating or topical trust flow or all those kind of things. Without using a third-party tool, how can you actually measure how strong your site is? And I've gotten into, this was a theory put out called avalanche theory by Chris Carter. He's of SERPWU. And I've run with that, and then I'm actually running a live experiment with it where people can look at the website, but basically building a site without any backlinks and then using the clicks or the impressions that you're receiving as a metric for how strong your site is. And I found that in using this concept and then kind of creating a framework out of it, when you can identify how strong your site actually is, you can do a lot in terms of decreasing volatility from Google updates, decreasing reliance on boosts or signals that you can't control, such as backlinks. If you're doing things where you know how strong your site is and you can raise how strong your site is through content that's posted within, say, your tier or your current rating, again, not relying on some third-party tool, but identifying like this is how strong we are because we can win these terms really without any SEO because Google will trust us because this is within our tier. When you can do that, you can grow your site at a predictable clip and you can decrease volatility anytime there's an update or a change in the algo because really all you're doing is posting content. A strategy where you're doing that at the same time as the SEO that you would normally do, say with your backlink or your outreach campaigns or other type things you might be doing for SEO that you've found to be successful. If you were at the same time then to be conscious of the content that you're posting, to raise your site's authority without boosts, without backlinks or anything else, I found that to be an extremely useful and advanced strategy that it's really our bread and butter within the agency. We've been quite successful for some time doing it. If you want to get into real technical things, getting into fringe SEO is a good idea. Those would be the types of things that search engines see that might be factors, but that humans will never see. Stuff within your code, within your HTML, match counts for your different important terms that are naturally within templates and then within links that you post and stuff like that. Being mindful of those things is a way to get into some advanced SEO that can be the point where you like, how can we get an edge? We're going up against these large sites and how can we get an edge here? And we think we've done all the stuff. Advanced SEO can be found in fringe SEO.
I guess on that subject, in a way, I think you hinted at, but I do want to dig a little bit deeper. What would you say when it comes to the advanced SEOs? What are the mistakes they're making that are really setting them back most often?
The biggest mistake is just not having a framework, I think. You have to decide before you do SEO what you're going to do. What is the plan? I think a lot of even advanced SEOs are really flying by the seat of their pants and they're just doing something month to month or even week to week. You should have a much longer view, at least like a 3-month sprint, evaluating where we want to get to and what we're going to do to make that happen. And there has to be some sort of foundational framework that you've got in place, like, okay, this is the strategy that we're going with, and this is why. And you see a lot of advanced SEOs that are successful, but they're scrambling month to month, I think, to do SEO. It's no way to live. It's wildly stressful and it's counterproductive. So that's the biggest thing that I see. And then one thing that I would say that I see from advanced SEOs that I've mentioned that beginners do is that they latch on to the shiny new technique without the foundation and then don't complete it. They kind of, instead of doing that foundational work that they know about, that they should be doing, they kind of skip that and go right to a fancier technique or a more advanced technique. And they end up being not as successful as they could be because they kind of missed that first layer. And then because they missed that first layer, they don't complete the technique. I see that a lot as well. And that's probably going back to the lack of a framework. Because again, if you're going month to month and changing the strategy, and maybe it's because if you're doing client work that you're trying to show the client that you're doing something new and innovative, rather than having that set of things that you're going to do. And as I mentioned, that framework, without having that in place and they're bouncing around, it just ends up problematic and they're not nearly as successful as they could be.
The way that people jump around and they don't have that framework, I'm personally jumping around in the questions a little bit here, but do you think it's because they're getting the wrong direction from, other SEOs in the space who are giving out advice or approaches and, they become really popular in the space, but that doesn't mean that they're the right approach. Sometimes, as we know, I think in online business, there's gurus and they might put things out there that are like, they're false or damaging. I don't know if you saw anything like that in the space that you feel like are leading people astray. And if so, what would your counter be to that common advice or approach?
Well, the thing that kind of gets me is following the advice of someone that doesn't do SEO. There are a lot of people that give a lot of advice and they don't do any SEO at all. And I'm always kind of surprised by that, like the bravado. I don't do this, but here's what you should do, is very impressive to me. I think if somebody is giving you advice, they need to show you some examples. They need to show you work that they've done. They need to be transparent about where these techniques came from, the outcomes that they've had, where they would put them in terms of beginner to advanced, and also risk. Is this definitely within Google's guidelines? Is this maybe pushing a boundary? Is this out of bounds? They need to be pretty honest about that and the risk associated with it. But more than anything, they have to show multiple examples of this is what I did, and I did it here, and I've done this over here. And then you can feel good about the advice. So I think often the advice that goes astray, and maybe beyond just beginner stuff, but once you get into this is how you do SEO, you want to be listening to somebody that's doing SEO. And I think if you do that and you can see the work and you can see the outcome and then it's solid, then you're going to be fine following those techniques. But if they're not doing SEO, then there's really no point. And also, if they've only done it once, anybody can do anything one time, but it's the repeatable factor, the repetition, the predictability. As I said, it's a game of probability. Are the techniques that you do more likely than not to be a success? And so if somebody's only done something one time, it's hard to say that, okay, if I do that thing, I'm going to have the exact same outcome. And in fact, it's more likely that you won't. And again, at that point, you're just in that coin flip territory or worse, and there's really little point in trying any of those techniques. So you want to see something that's been repeated, that is solid, and that you've seen that work, and then you can feel good about that advice.
Yeah, really solid advice. It's learning from those that are actually doing what it is that you're trying to achieve is always going to give you the best results. And I guess, in the same context as well, we've already broken down several options for SEOs and what they should be targeting as far as how to update their site or maybe even target certain keywords correctly to really move the needle in their favor. But I'm curious for any SEO at any level, what would you say are maybe some of the smart tests that can help their SEO rankings? What would you say are maybe like a checklist of things that you should go through and check on your site that ultimately will help you build that strategy or that framework, as you had mentioned?
Well, the very first thing is you need a place to do those tests. Kind of as mentioned, like at the beginner SEO, they need a place just to learn SEO. Once you've gone beyond that beginner phase, you need a place to try those techniques. And on a site that you care about, on a client site, should not be the place where you're trying techniques. But, that sounds so obvious, but I know that it isn't. In 2015, I gave my very first talk at a conference. And the talk that I gave was about how to set up an SEO test. And this was it's a conference, it's extremely high level. It's a smaller conference, but it's great and very, very high level people in there. And I thought the talk that I was going to be doing was like, well, this is how I do it. How do you guys do it? And be more kind of conversational. And about 5 minutes into my talk, I realized, nobody's doing this. Nobody's setting up these sites and nobody's running tests like this at all. And if you have a site where you can test something, you are already ahead of 95% of the SEOs out there. And if you can be diligent with it and put something into place, you don't have to run tests at the level that I'm running them or as strict as I run them, just to have a place where you could put up 2 identical pages and then do one thing to one of them and see how they perform, see what happens in that scenario. And then do that several times. You're going to get a pretty good feel for what does and doesn't work. And you didn't have to set up a test nearly as rigorously as I've got mine set up or that we do within IMG where they're peer reviewed. Just to do that, set up 2 pages that are identical and then index them so they're both in Google's index and then do something to one. That thing that you want to test is, does this work or does it not? If you did that and you run that test multiple times, you can figure out a lot about SEO. That's going to put you so far ahead of your competition. And then when people talk about SEO like, well, you should do this or that, then you're going to know if they're talking nonsense or not because you're going to have run a bunch of tests on it. And at a minimum, you can say, what, I've run this test 10 times on that specific thing, and I didn't get the outcome that you're getting. And it gives you a place to evaluate any of that other information from anybody else that you're getting on SEO.
Yeah, it makes sense. I mean, like it was mentioned before, if you did one thing and it moved the needle for you, then you weren't able to manipulate that or, emulate that again, I guess, in a sense that you're not really sure if that is the deciding factor on what helped you gain that ranking. And I know you already touched base on this earlier in the call as far as other factors outside of SEO, but I'm curious, what would you say are some of the most powerful levers that content site owners can pull in order to grow their sites outside of some of the SEO techniques that we've already talked about?
I would say traffic, and from any source. Traffic is something that's really difficult to nail down in a testing environment if it is or is not a ranking factor. But just anecdotally, when you look at like any of the sites that we work on in our agency or any revenue generating sites that we have, when we run traffic to them, from ads or Facebook or Twitter or something that we run, you tend to see positive results within SEO. And so I would say one lever that you can pull is just get legitimate traffic, not bots, but legitimate traffic from any source, I think is something that can benefit your site. And if you're getting the targeted traffic, they're going to spend more time on your site. They're going to click around. They're going to complete your forms and those types of things. And I've found that the more of those things that happen on your site, the better things do all the way around.
Awesome. I'm wondering, this is not an easy question because as you pointed out during this interview, there's already been all these different algorithm updates. Google is implementing different things all the time. But, what's your best guess at what the future of SEO might look like? Is there a way possible that online business owners could try to stay ahead of the curve?
Authority hackers, you guys probably know them. They always do a prediction show in December the year before, and I think I was proven right in my prediction. I said that Google is more and more hostile to affiliate sites. And I see that, I think I'm right. I think the last several updates have really targeted affiliate sites. But lumping in affiliate sites isn't quite fair. And I think it's problematic for a lot of affiliate sites is that they can't show that they're real. And so the thing that I mentioned previously on making sure that you're presenting as a real company, that's a problem for a lot of affiliates because it's hard. It's not easy to create a business. Of course, just open a business, but it's really not that easy. You have to do the paperwork. You have to jump through the hoops. There are tax implications. I know a lot of people want to avoid that, or they might work from home. Like, well, I don't want to give out my home address. Well, a lot of businesses have that issue and they've figured it out. You should take the time to figure it out. And so like my number one advice and staying ahead of Google is definitely has a preference for sites that it knows it's a real company or there's a real company behind it. And from a pragmatic sense that it makes sense that if they're going to present results within, in the SERPs and somebody were to click on a particular site and then they were to buy something and then they had a problem, Google, I think, wants to make sure that there's redress, that they can contact an actual company and get their money back or return the product. Or in a worst case, if they're harmed, something has gone terribly wrong, that there's somebody that's responsible for that harm. And a real company would be, because a real company has done what they need to do in terms of setting up with the state or the local government. They've got their tax IDs and then they've got any insurance that they're supposed to have for that particular industry if needed. Real companies do those things. Some fly-by-night affiliate doesn't. And so I think it's not necessarily that Google is hostile to affiliates, but Google is hostile to sites that it can't really determine if somebody is really responsible for this content. And so what I think you can do first and foremost to protect yourself from a lot of future Google updates is just to be a real company. Get ahead of the curve there and present yourself. You might say, like, I am real, but I'm not showing it on my site. We'll show it on your site. Get all the stuff that you should be showing up to protect yourself from those things. And in a funny way, it's not the kind of thing that's going to increase your rank, but in a way it does. So you do all those things, you're not going to get any movement, but then Google does another sweep, and then your competitors that haven't done that, they drop and you move up and take their places. So it's kind of one of those backhanded ranking factors where when somebody else hasn't done it and you have, you rise as a matter of them dropping. So I would do that. The other way to really stay ahead of the game is to make sure that you benchmarked your site in terms of the SEO that you've done. How many times do you have terms in specific places? Do you actually have that written down somewhere? Because what happens is that when an update happens, you can then evaluate the winners. If you're on page 1 and you move to page 2, you can see who took your spot. And you can count how many times they have terms in specific places. And you can count how many backlinks they have. And you compare that to yours. But if you didn't benchmark that in the first place, then you don't really know. You don't really know what the page 1 average is or what might be a competitive average for your type of site. So you want to have those benchmarks in place, what your competitors are doing, what you have done. And then when there's an update change, you can see who's moved into different spots and evaluate what you might need to change. But if you haven't benchmarked those things, then you'll never know. So benchmarking is critical. Benchmarking the SEO work that you've done and the SEO work that your competitors have done will always keep you ahead of any kind of update.
Excellent. I know we're talking about the context is how to stay ahead. My next question for you, because I was going to be wrapping this up here soon, and we'd like to do it with a little, rapid fire section, is what's the best hidden growth opportunities for SEOs? Probably some of the things you mentioned they do feel hidden, but I'm curious, do you have anything else that you feel like are particularly hidden that SEOs could take advantage of?
Yeah, topic coverage and not being afraid of zero search term phrases. Like people also ask and those kind of things that come back with zero terms. People shrug those off and consider them a waste of time. But I find the more that I do of those, the more traffic I get. And I also find that all boats tend to rise. When you've got those pages going and they just, even if they're trickling in clicks and impressions, when you start picking a bunch of those, you end up with a lot of featured snippets. You end up with a lot of your own. People also ask sections that you're claiming, and it turns into a lot of excellent growth.
Yeah, and I guess, that could be also a future factor that might not be a searchable term now, but come several months later, that might be something that people are starting to search for because of a new trend or whatever the case may be. So it's always great that, you're covering all of those bases as well, too, if it's relevant to your content, I guess, in that sense. Next rapid fire question for you. So what other tools or resources do you think can really help aspiring SEOs or maybe even content business owners to help them grow their business? I know you had mentioned a few of the software platforms that we're pretty familiar with, like Moz and Ahrefs, but I'm just curious if you had any other resources that could really help them.
Oh, this has to be shameless plug time, right?
Yeah, pretty much, yeah.
My stuff is excellent.
Oh, yeah.
I do believe in my stuff. In the agency, we use PageOptimizer Pro, and we're a very successful agency. So for your on-page, I do definitely recommend that. And it's kind of nice about the community we have, Internet Marketing Gold, is that I think we have like 33 courses in there now. And you get access to all of them. You get access to the community. And then we are running tests on Google's algorithm. So it's one of those things where you can figure out what Google is actually doing, what is or is not a ranking factor now. And at the same time, you can take that knowledge and then you can watch some excellent courses on a wide variety of things within SEO. And then we're actually kind of straying a little bit outside of SEO too. We just had a course with Matt Diggity where he talks about his biohacking and health and wellness with the idea of optimizing your life. The concept of a high performance. If you're doing well and you're performing well and you're a high performance kind of person, how can you maintain that? And I really thought that was just an excellent topic to bring to the table because, I'm in my 40s and my thought is like, how much longer can I excel? The idea of a band that puts out, one or two really good albums and then it drops off because they lose their creativity. I've kind of had that thought in the back of my mind. In the last 7 years, I've been wildly productive and very creative. Will that go away? And so then Matt, who was into biohacking, I was like, hey, do you want to talk about this? Can I learn your secrets? So getting into those kind of concepts as well. And so kind of attacking SEO from all angles, including your health, is what we're looking at in IMG. And I like that a lot.
Yeah, it's really awesome. Yeah, it's funny that you bring up Matt Diggity. We've had him on the podcast as well. And Sarah and I had the opportunity to hang out with him in Ho Chi Minh City. And yeah, it was a really great time to talk more deeper about SEO. And he's a complete book of knowledge when it comes to the SEO space and being able to bounce those ideas and I guess taking a step back and looking at what others are doing and what kind of topics that they're trying to cover is really great to just continue to grow your knowledge in this space. And I think that's a really important thing for SEOs and content business owners to do is always to stay learning and always stay on top of kind of what's currently going on in the world of SEO. So that's really awesome that you mentioned that. Now, final rapid fire question for you, Kyle. So what would you say has been your funniest moment working online as a digital entrepreneur?
So I've been speaking since 2015 and speaking internationally. And in 2019 was the first time that my family traveled with me, my wife and my son. And I was trying to prep my wife. And I was like, when we go to these things, I kind of get recognized and it's a little funny. And she kind of rolled her eyes like, yeah, okay, whatever. But so we're in Bali at this really great conference and the hotel is attached to the conference area. And this beautiful hotel in Bali. And when you walk in, it's an open air reception area for where you check in. And the pool is right there. And there's a little poolside bar. And then they've got it all set up. And the restaurant's kind of in this U shape, if you will, where the pool runs the length of the hotel. And so the reception is kind of at the base of the U. And anyway, we're checking in. And all as I hear this, that's Kyle Roof. And this woman comes from the pool area running in her bikini towards us.
Oh, no.
She's like,
your wife is freaking out, right? What is this crazy lady doing?
I was like, what are you doing at SEO? Like, what?
And she's like, you're Kyle Roof, right? And I was like, I am Kyle Roof, and this is my wife. And she was like, oh my gosh, I'm so sorry. And then I looked at my wife, I was like, I told you, this happens at these things. And on that same trip, we went to the next conference, actually a couple of conferences later in the trip, but there was actually Chiang Mai SEO here in Chiang Mai. And we're in the airport, and this guy walked up to us while we're waiting for a taxi, and he goes, you're Kyle Roof. And I was like, I am. And he's like, cool. And he just walks away. You know?
Oh, wow.
And then we got the next day at lunch. This is before the conference. These three guys came up to us and they're like, "We didn't want to bother you because we know you're having lunch, but you're Kyle Roof, right?" And my wife was just had enough of it at that point. But that was a lot of fun. Traveling with her to these things so she could see what I've been experiencing was pretty funny.
Yeah.
I love how people just walked away or just didn't have a good follow-up to your Kyle.
No, they're just more like confirmation, like,
yeah.
Okay, right? Like, I am that
yes.
Confirmation,
and then just, I think everybody needs to start planning better follow-ups when they meet somebody that they know online. It's like, just have a question in your back pocket, folks, like, because you can't just end it there. You can't just walk away either. That's even worse.
Yeah.
That's awesome.
That's funny.
Well, appreciate having you on to go through so many just solid pieces of advice here, and great to get your perspective. It's so fun to have SEOs on the show. And as you know, every SEO's got their own approach to things. And we know that yours is tried and literally tested. So, thanks for going over that and sharing that with our audience. I think it's going to give people a lot of value.
Well, many thanks for having me. I really appreciate it.
Hey everyone, now that we wrapped up this episode and learned about how you can improve your content site rankings using SEO, we wanted to cover a common question about buying and selling online businesses. So this week's question is, what are the key metrics or components that investors look at when considering an online business to acquire? Now, this is next to the revenue or profit, of course, and also which factors have an influence on the selling price. So this is a really great question, and it's something that we often get asked quite often, and we do talk about it quite often in our content as well. And it usually refers to our due diligence checklist. So if you're not familiar, you can go ahead and download your own due diligence checklist following our blog content. And generally speaking, the due diligence checklist consists of 10 different checks that most investors will look at when determining whether or not they'd like to acquire a specific asset on our marketplace or not. So the 10 checks are the level of copy, the backlink profile, the speed and performance of the business, the niche that it's in, whether or not it's an evergreen or a trending status niche, the level of competition, the traffic scalability, and that refers to any amount of content that you can add or maybe keywords that the website is not ranking for just yet, say within positions 11 through 20. And that offers a more desirable business or asset for an investor if there are some low-hanging fruit that they can come in and scale the traffic further just by targeting those keywords. The seventh check on this list is the monetization opportunities. And this can be anything from adding in a different type of revenue source or monetizing the business or the brand in another form other than what is generating the most money. The eighth check is the traffic trends, and usually with a review site, traffic and rankings over the past 18 months is what you would like to look at and see the trends as far as the traffic is growing, or maybe it might be in a slight decline. You'd want to take note of that. And then also the design and UX and the technical crawl status. And that consists of the SSLs, the sitemaps, the robots.txt files, and any other 404 or 301 redirect pages. Now, all of these checks are just part of a general due diligence checklist, and every investor is going to have their own specific checklist that they go through in determining if a digital asset meets their business or personal goals. But for the most part, this general checklist does give you a broader picture of the types of metrics or maybe even the components that go into determining whether or not an online business is a great investment or not. All right, everyone. That wraps up this week's episode of the Opportunity Podcast. We hope you've gained some valuable insight on the opportunities that digital acquisitions offer. Click the link in the description or visit empireflippers.com/marketplace to learn more about listings currently live on our platform. If you enjoyed this episode, be sure to leave a review and subscribe to this podcast for more great content that will be released very soon. Thanks again for tuning into the Opportunity Podcast, and we're looking forward to having you back next week and hear from your fellow entrepreneurs and online experts.